Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your neighbors want you dead. Not because of something you did, not because of a crime, but simply because of who you are. In 1994, the small African nation of Rwanda descended into one of the most horrifying genocides in human history. Over just 100 days, around 800,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered, while much of the world stood by and watched. Families were torn apart, churches became killing grounds, and lifelong friendships turned into deadly betrayals. How did an entire nation fall into such unimaginable darkness, and could it happen again? This is the story of the Rwandan Genocide. 100 days of hell that changed Africa forever, April 1994. In the heart of Africa, a small nation known for its rolling green hills was about to descend into one of the darkest chapters in human history. A place where children played together, where families farmed side by side, where neighbors attended the same markets, the same churches, and often celebrated the same weddings. But in just 100 days, friendship would turn into hatred. Trust would turn into betrayal. Many were hunted in churches. Many were killed by the very neighbors they had known all their lives. This is the story of the Rwandan Genocide, a story of hatred, propaganda, fear. Let's travel back to Rwanda, a beautiful nation that would soon become a killing field. Long before the genocide, Rwanda was known as the land of 1,000 hills. The country was small, smaller than many states and provinces around the world, but its hills were covered in green vegetation. Its valleys were fertile. Its people were hardworking farmers. To outsiders, Rwanda seemed peaceful, but beneath the surface tensions had been building for generations. The population was primarily divided into three groups: the Hutu, the Tutsi, and the Twa. For centuries, these groups lived together. They spoke the same language, shared the same culture, and often lived in the same communities. In many cases, the distinctions between Hutu and Tutsi were not even rigid. People married across groups. Some families had members from both identities. The divisions were not originally based on race in the way many outsiders would later believe, but everything changed when European colonial powers arrived. In the late 19th century, Rwanda fell under colonial control. First came Germany. Later, after World War I, Belgium took over. The Belgian authorities looked at Rwanda and saw differences between Hutu and Tutsi. Instead of treating these identities as fluid social groups, they turned them into rigid categories. The colonizers believed the Tutsi were superior. They considered them more intelligent and more suited for leadership. As a result, Tutsis were often given positions of authority. Many Hutus felt marginalized. Resentment began to grow. Over time, the colonial government introduced identity cards. Every person was labeled Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa. These cards would later become instruments of death because decades later, killers would use them to identify their victims. The divisions that colonial rulers deepened would leave scars that lasted generations, and those scars would eventually explode into violence. By the late 1950s, change was coming. Many Hutus demanded greater political power. Years of frustration erupted into violence. In 1959, widespread attacks against Tutsis broke out. Thousands were killed. Many more fled Rwanda. Families escaped with only what they could carry. Children walked for days. Mothers carried babies through forests. Entire communities crossed borders seeking safety. The refugees settled in neighboring countries such as Uganda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Zaire, today known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But exile did not erase their memories. Many dreamed of returning home. Years passed. The anger remained. The wounds never healed. Instead, they grew deeper on both sides. Among the Tutsi refugees growing up outside Rwanda was a young generation that had never seen their homeland. They knew Rwanda only through stories told by parents, stories told by grandparents, stories about lost homes, lost farms, lost relatives, lost lives. Many of these young refugees eventually joined a military movement known as the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF. Their goal was simple: return to Rwanda. But the Rwandan government feared them. Officials portrayed them as invaders, enemies, a threat to national security. Fear spread throughout the country, and fear is often the most powerful weapon of all. Because when people are afraid, They become easier to manipulate, easier to control, easier to convince that violence is necessary. The stage was being set for catastrophe, but most ordinary Rwandans had no idea what was coming. As tensions increased, extremist politicians began spreading dangerous messages. They used newspapers, public meetings, and most importantly, radio. Radio was everywhere in Rwanda. People listened while farming, while cooking, while gathering with friends. And extremist broadcasters understood the power they held. They repeatedly described Tutsis as enemies, as traitors, as dangerous outsiders. Some broadcasters even referred to them as cockroaches. The language was deliberate, because history has shown that before mass killing begins, victims are often dehumanized. If people can be convinced that another group is less than human, violence becomes easier. The broadcast became increasingly aggressive, increasingly hateful, increasingly dangerous. Yet much of the world paid little attention. Warnings were ignored, alarm bells were dismissed, and Rwanda moved closer and closer to disaster. April 6, 1994. The sun was setting over Rwanda. Most people were finishing dinner. Children were preparing for bed. Families were settling in for the evening. Then suddenly, an airplane appeared in the night sky. Inside was Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana. As the aircraft approached Kigali Airport, a missile struck. The plane exploded. Flames lit up the darkness. No one survived. Within minutes, chaos spread across the country. Roadblocks appeared. Soldiers mobilized. Militias received orders. And lists of names began circulating. The assassination became the spark. But the fire had been prepared long before. What happened next was not spontaneous. It was organized, planned, and terrifyingly efficient. The killing would begin within hours, and Rwanda would enter 100 days of hell. As news of the president's death spread across Rwanda, fear swept through the nation. Many people believed violence was coming, but few could imagine the scale of what was about to happen. Within hours of the plane crash, armed soldiers and militia groups moved into action. Roadblocks appeared across Kigali, the capital city. Cars were stopped, passengers were ordered out, identity cards were checked. Those small cards that colonial authorities had introduced decades earlier suddenly became death warrants. If your card identified Yukutsi, your chances of survival dropped dramatically. Many were dragged from vehicles. Some were beaten. Others were killed on the spot. Throughout the night, gunfire echoed across Kigali. Families hid inside their homes. Parents whispered to terrified children. Nobody knew who would be next. The darkness seemed endless, and Rwanda's nightmare had only just begun. This was not random violence. Many of the victims had already been selected. Extremist leaders possessed lists containing the names of political opponents, journalists, activists, and moderate Hutus who supported peace. The killers knew exactly where many of these people lived. One by one, they were hunted down. Among the first targets was Rwanda's Prime Minister, Agathe Uwilingiyimana. She had opposed extremist policies and supported peace negotiations. When soldiers arrived at her home, she tried desperately to protect her family. But it was too late. She was murdered. Several United Nations peacekeepers assigned to protect her were also captured and killed. Their deaths sent shockwaves through the international community. Yet instead of increasing international intervention, many countries began considering withdrawal. The world was already looking away. And the killers understood this. They realized there would likely be no one to stop them. Across Rwanda, radio stations continued broadcasting. But these were no ordinary broadcasts. Listeners heard names, addresses, instructions, commands. The radio told people where supposed enemies were hiding. It encouraged violence. It fueled fear and hatred. Again and again, listeners heard the same message. The enemy must be eliminated. The language became increasingly extreme. People were urged to work. But everyone knew what that word meant. Killing. Entire communities listened. Some ignored the messages. Others were terrified. But many obeyed. The radio transformed propaganda into action. And soon, villages across Rwanda would become battlefields. One of the most disturbing aspects of the genocide was who carried it out. Not only soldiers, not only trained fighters, ordinary civilians became involved. Farmers shot tightly. Fathers prayed for miracles. The elderly waited in silence. Outside, armed groups gathered. Inside, hope remained, at least for a little while. Then the attacks began. Some churches became sites of horrific massacres. Doors were broken down, windows shattered, gunfire erupted, machetes swung, screams filled the air. Many who had come seeking sanctuary never left alive. Some of the worst atrocities of the genocide occurred in places that people considered sacred. Even decades later, survivors struggle to speak about what happened inside those walls. The memories remain unbearable. Throughout Rwanda, countless families searched desperately for ways to survive. Some hid in ceilings, others hid beneath floorboards. Some concealed themselves in swamps for weeks. Many survived only because someone risked everything to help them. One survivor later recalled spending days hidden in a tiny bathroom with several other people. They could barely move. They barely spoke. Even a whisper felt dangerous. Outside, killers searched house after house. Every sound created panic. Every footstep felt like death approaching. Children were instructed not to cry. Parents covered their mouths to keep them silent. Imagine trying to explain to a frightened child that making noise could mean everyone dies. For thousands of families, this became daily reality. Hour after hour, day after day. The fear never ended. When people imagine genocide, they often picture armies using advanced weapons. But in Rwanda, one of the primary tools of killing was shockingly simple. The neighbors killing neighbors. Friends killing friends. The psychological scars would last for generations. Perhaps no victims suffered more than Rwanda's children. Thousands were orphaned. Thousands witnessed unimaginable violence. Many lost their entire families. Some watched parents being killed. Others became separated during chaotic escapes. Many wandered alone through devastated villages. Hungry, terrified, confused. They could not understand why their world had collapsed. They could not understand why adults were suddenly killing one another. Some children survived by hiding among bodies. Others survived by pretending to be dead. Years later, survivors would describe the memories as impossible to forget. The sounds, the smells, the fear, the loneliness. Even after the genocide ended, those memories remained. For many, they still remain today. As the death toll climbed, information began reaching the outside world. Foreign journalists reported horrifying scenes. Humanitarian organizations sounded alarms. United Nations officials issued warnings. Yet meaningful action failed to materialize. Governments debated terminology. They discussed politics. They considered risks. Meanwhile, people were dying by the thousands. Every single day, many nations still carried painful memories from failed interventions elsewhere. Some leaders hesitated. Others lacked political will. The result was devastating. While Rwanda burned, the world largely stood by. For many survivors, this became one of the most painful realities of all. Not only were they abandoned by neighbors, they felt abandoned by humanity itself. While the genocide raged, another force was moving. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF. Led by Paul Kagame, the rebel army launched a major offensive. Their objective was clear: defeat the government forces, stop the massacres, capture the country. Heavy fighting erupted across Rwanda. Battles intensified. Front lines shifted. For civilians trapped between the violence and the war, survival became even more difficult. Yet for many victims, the advancing RPF represented the only remaining hope, the only force capable of ending the slaughter. But before that happened, tens of thousands more would die, and Rwanda's darkest days were still ahead. By May 1994, Rwanda had become a nation consumed by death. The killings were no longer isolated incidents. They were everywhere: villages, towns, whose schools, churches, roads, fields. No place seemed untouched by violence. Every sunrise brought new massacres. Every sunset left behind more bodies. The death toll climbed at a terrifying pace.
Muramukazi wanjye yaramuhetse bamutikuye igicumu hano byo nararebaga ahita arerembura mu mugongo arurutsa ashyira hasi. Umutoya nawe bamukereye ijosi hano bamukereye ari mu mugongo wanjye. Ngewe icyatumye ndokoka ubwo nahise ndyama mbonye ukuntu barimo kwicisha abantu nta mpongano maze kuryama batese akagore mwakishe kabahama.
Thousands were dying every day. Entire communities disappeared. Families that had existed for generations vanished in a matter of hours. Survivors later described Rwanda as a country trapped in an endless nightmare. The smell of death hung in the air. Rivers carried bodies downstream. Dogs wandered abandoned villages. Silence replaced the sounds of normal life. For those still hiding, every day felt like borrowed time. Many wondered whether they would live to see another sunrise. Yet even in humanity's darkest moments, courage still existed. Across Rwanda, there were ordinary people who refused to participate. People who chose compassion over hatred. Some hid neighbors in their homes. Others forged documents. Some escorted families through dangerous territory. Many knew that helping victims could mean death for themselves and their families. Yet they acted anyway. One hotel manager in Kigali became known around the world for sheltering hundreds of people inside his hotel. While killers searched outside, he used every connection, every negotiation, and every ounce of courage to keep those inside alive. Across the country, countless others performed similar acts of bravery. Many of their names are unknown. Many never sought recognition. But because of them, thousands survived. Their stories remind us that even during genocide, humanity can still endure. As the massacres continued, the Rwandan Patriotic Front pressed forward. Their forces captured more territory. Government troops fought desperately to stop them. Battles erupted across the countryside. Explosions echoed through towns. Gunfire rattled through the hills. For civilians, the fighting brought both hope and fear. Hope that the killings might finally end. Fear that they could be caught in the crossfire. The RPF continued advancing toward Kigali. The capital city had become the center of the crisis. Its capture would change everything. But the closer the rebels came, the more desperate the extremists became. The violence intensified. The killings accelerated. It was as though the perpetrators knew their time was running out, and they intended to kill as many people as possible before the end arrived. July 1994. After months of fighting, the RPF entered Kigali. Government forces collapsed. Militia groups began fleeing. The regime that had overseen the genocide was falling apart. For many survivors, the arrival of RPF troops felt unreal. After weeks of terror, hiding, hunger, and uncertainty, the killing was finally slowing. Some emerged from hiding places for the first time in months. Others searched desperately for relatives. Many found empty homes, destroyed villages, or heartbreaking confirmation that loved ones would never return. The genocide was ending. But Rwanda itself had been shattered. The nation that emerged from those 100 days would never be the same again. As the RPF secured control, millions of people fled Rwanda. The movement of refugees became one of the largest and fastest population movements in modern African history. Roads filled with people carrying bundles of possessions. Children walked beside exhausted parents. Entire families crossed borders into neighboring countries. Huge refugee camps appeared almost overnight. Conditions were terrible. Food was scarce. Water was limited. Disease spread rapidly. Cholera outbreaks killed thousands. Humanitarian organizations struggled to keep up with the scale of the crisis. Many refugees were innocent civilians terrified of retaliation. Others included individuals responsible for genocide. The camps became complex and dangerous environments. The violence had not truly ended. It had simply crossed borders, and its consequences would continue affecting Central Africa for years to come. When the killing stopped, survivors faced an impossible task: finding loved ones. Across Rwanda, people searched hospitals, churches, schools, mass graves, abandoned buildings. Some found answers, many never did. Countless victims had disappeared without a trace. Entire families had been wiped out. Children wandered through villages, searching for parents who would never return. Mothers searched for sons. Brothers searched for sisters. Friends searched for friends. The emotional devastation was almost impossible to comprehend. There were survivors everywhere, but nearly everyone was grieving. Nearly everyone carried invisible wounds. One question haunted Rwanda: how do you seek justice after a crime this enormous? Hundreds of thousands had participated in the violence. The prison system quickly became overwhelmed. International tribunals were established to prosecute key organizers of the genocide. Some leaders were arrested, others fled and spent years hiding. Many were eventually captured and brought to trial. Inside Rwanda, community-based courts, known as Gakaka courts, were used to process large numbers of cases. These hearings allowed communities to confront painful truths. Victims heard confessions. Families learned what had happened to loved ones. The process was imperfect, but many believed it was necessary. The nation needed answers. The nation needed accountability, and the nation needed a path forward. The genocide left Rwanda devastated. Its economy was shattered. Infrastructure had been damaged. Trust between communities had collapsed. Many wondered whether recovery was even possible. Yet slowly, Rwanda began rebuilding. Schools reopened. Roads were repaired. Businesses returned. New institutions were created. The government emphasized national unity. A new generation grew up learning about the dangers of division and hatred. The scars remained, but so did determination. The people of Rwanda faced one of the greatest challenges any nation can face: how to move forward after unimaginable tragedy. And against overwhelming odds, they began doing exactly that. Today, the Rwandan Genocide stands as one of the most horrifying events of the 20th century. Around 800,000 people were killed in approximately 100 days. Many historians believe the true number may be even higher, but statistics alone cannot tell the story. Each number was a person, a child, a mother, a father, a friend, a dream, a future. The genocide teaches a painful lesson. Mass atrocities do not begin with killing. They begin with hatred, with division, with propaganda, with the belief that one group of people is somehow less human than another. By the time violence starts, the groundwork has often been laid for years. That is why remembering Rwanda matters, not only for the victims, not only for the survivors, but for all of humanity. Because remembrance is a form of protection. History cannot change the past, but it can help prevent the future from repeating it. For 100 days, Rwanda experienced a nightmare that shocked the world. A nation of hills and villages became a landscape of fear. Families were destroyed, communities were torn apart, and humanity witnessed one of its darkest failures. Yet amid the horror, there were also stories of courage, stories of survival, stories of people who risked everything to save others. Stories that remind us that even in the darkest times, hope can survive. The Rwandan genocide changed Africa forever, but its lessons belong to the entire world. If this documentary helped you understand this tragic chapter of history, please subscribe to Real Story Network and turn on notifications. Your support helps preserve and share important historical stories that must never be forgotten. And as always, thank you for watching. Never forget Rwanda.